Hi, welcome back to my podcast, Music and Movie Reviews, the podcast. Like I said, title's still in construction. We're going to see if we can come up with something better. But that's all I have for now. So, let's jump right in. So just this morning when I woke up, I decided, you know what, today is a good day to do an album review. And I thought, I want to do something new. I want to do a freshly released album. So I get on Spotify and I look in recent releases for you, which if some of you don't have Spotify, what they do is they show you brand new releases from artists that you follow. And apparently there was an album released last night, which I had no idea. Either last night or yesterday. Okay, so this album, The Great Unlearning, by Ramleh? Okay, I don't know how to pronounce their name. I'm definitely a fan of the band, but when I think about it, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that name. So I'm just going to say Ramleh. Now, I did not know that they had a new album coming out, but on May 31st, they released this new album. And so, yeah, today is June 1st. That's the day that I'm recording this. Probably won't be out until a little later. But I just want to give you guys my first thoughts when I look at this. And that is that I see that the tags for this are noise rock, drone, and free improvisation. So what it looks like to me is that this album, much like most of their albums, is going to be rooted in rock music that plays with feedback, with psychedelic elements, sort of like space rock elements. They have a lot of albums that I've listened to in the past that are mainly... They're rooted in rock music, but they have a lot of free improvisation and a lot of feedback, a lot of noise coming from the guitars. So it's not straight up noise music, but it's noise made with the traditional rock instrumentation. And so I'm assuming that that is what this album will be like, which that is what most of these guys' albums are like. Although the album that they are most known for is not like that. Now, if you know anything about Ramleh, their most popular album, I believe, is Hole in the Heart, which was released in 1987. And that album, a lot of people call it a power electronics album. I don't know how... I mean, I guess you could classify it as death industrial, which is a more ambient version, but I don't really know. It's really hard to classify some of these albums. It mainly really is a dark ambient album, and it is based in industrial music, so I suppose that you could say death industrial. It's very dark, it's very slow, it has a lot of noise, and it has a lot of drone. Now, that album is actually one of my very favorite... I would say one of my top albums of all time. Don't listen to it when you're happy because it's going to ruin your mood, but it's a really good album. Now, when I started listening to some of their other music, I was kind of taken aback because Hole in the Heart is a very ambient album. It seems like it's created with a lot of... it doesn't have guitar. It seems like it's made with maybe some synths, keyboard, and a lot of pedals and things that are used to create feedback and noise. It doesn't have a lot of percussion, and it doesn't have guitar. Now, the rest of their albums that I've ever listened to seem to be very rooted in the rock setup. They have the drums, bass guitar, electric guitar. But what they do is they play a lot of free improvisation, which is, it's the rock version of free jazz. They just go for it. And free improvisation is a genre that I really enjoy, but it's also one that's really hard to get into. So if you aren't already into free improvisation or at least noise music, I'm going to say right now that I do not recommend this album, even before I've listened to it, just because I highly doubt that it's going to be extremely accessible for those of you who are not already into these avant-garde types of music. Now, before I listen to it, I just want to say that the album cover, it looks really nice. What it is it's one photograph layered on top of another, and the bottom photograph looks like some kind of industrial type setting, you know, metal, and it's in black and white, a degraded photo. And then on top of that, we have another sort of industrial photo, which is some pipes, you know, some large metal objects. And the one in front is a very strange looking metal object that looks like it has teeth. So, I don't know. I like the title, The Great Unlearning. It kind of sounds like a Nine Inch Nails title, but it doesn't sound cheesy. It sounds nice. So I guess we're gonna see. I'm really excited to look into this album. I'm a big fan of the band. I'm pretty excited, having heard some of their even more recent albums, like Circular Time, I believe it's called. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to this album right now, and then I'll get back to you. Alright guys, I am back. I just finished listening to the album. So, did I get what I expected? We will get into that. Now, this album starts off with a motoric beat and a chugging bass reminiscent of krautrock, and it was surrounded by waves of droning synths. Now, the first impression I got from Future World, that's the name of the first track, is that it was going to be a very psychedelic album. The atmosphere was surprisingly uplifting because I really expected darker from Ramleh. The whole song continued in a very repetitive way, which again highlighted the krautrock influences. And throughout the song, the synths became steadily more atonal, and they turned into a wall of noise. So this whole song it started to melt together in a very psychedelic way. Another synth took up the role of the melody, seeing as how at this point we had no lead guitar, there was no electric guitar, there was just drums and bass, and they were kind of stuck on repeat. But that didn't get boring. It just the repetitive nature it sort of had a hypnotizing quality, and it drew me into the song. And I was just thinking while I was listening to this, you know, I was like, this would be great to just smoke a bowl, lay down in bed with some headphones, close your eyes, and just drift away, which is, again, very psychedelic. A little past halfway through this 18-minute song, it was a huge opener, a venomous lead guitar entered, and it played sort of an angular riff with a very coarse, gritty tone. I absolutely loved it. As far as I was concerned, this first song was a masterpiece, and I was thinking, you know, if the entire album continues in this vein, then I am going to be very happy that I decided to check this album out today. The lead guitar was quickly subsumed by the wall of noise. It sort of entered the layers, drifted underneath some of the noise and the haze, and another guitar actually entered the song, and it had a psychedelic rock droning melody. I'm not quite sure how to say it. It was, think of Pink Floyd, kind of had that vibe. Now, as this absolute monster of an intro track faded out into electronic feedback, we segue into the second track, which is titled The Twitch. At 8 minutes, this song is a lot closer to the length of a normal one, so I'm kind of wondering what Ramleh has in store for us at this point. Once again, we have the motoric drum beat, heavy bass, a little bit of synth, and electric guitar. Now, I was really surprised by the inclusion of vocals on this track as well. It sounded like a group of people yelling, you know, not screaming but yelling nihilistic lyrics that I couldn't quite understand, as warped electronics created an eerie cloak around this more traditional noise rock foundation. Now, these yelled lyrics are, I believe that they are called gang vocals, where you have a group of people yelling this song. I saw one comment on this album on Rate Your Music, which is a website I regularly use. It's an amazing website. If you don't use it, you totally should. Obviously, not being sponsored. Nobody sponsors me. I'm using my phone to record this podcast. but I saw a comment on this album saying that it was influenced by no wave, which on this song particularly makes a lot of sense. Now, this song sort of breaks down at the end and becomes this really messy, chaotic pot of feedback and furious drumming and free improv as well. I actually expected a lot more free improv in this album. There was a free improv tag on there, but I didn't really think that there was enough on this album to warrant that. In past releases by the band, however, there has been quite a lot of free improv, and so I actually expected quite a bit more. Now, Blood Aurora, our third song, seems much darker and more depressing in contrast to the psychedelia of the first two. There's atonal, no-wave guitar creating lines of feedback on top of a very sinister sounding bass, and then even clips of static or raw noise. Now, the feeling I'm getting at this point is that this album does something new with each song, while still retaining a coherent underlying theme and atmospheric mesh of diverse styles, which, as you know, a plus for me. I think that's really important in an album. So I had a feeling that I was going to thoroughly enjoy the rest of the album. Blood Aurora has less structure and sort of devolves into free improvisation, but I'm starting to think that my warning at the beginning of this episode, which was, if you remember, do not check this out unless you're already a fan of noise or free improv. I'm starting to think that that warning was preemptive because despite the feedback in the drone, this song and the album so far was actually really accessible. You know, relatively. For Ramleh, for a power electronics group, this album was very accessible. Now, music for these times, the next song, it was a more traditional song. It featured a verse, chorus, verse. Had more of these shouted vocals, but there was a distinct lead singer this time, and I've got to say that I didn't hate his voice. All of this is done over a traditional noise rock, post-punk type of song. Music for these times proves that Ramleh is just as adept at making a real rock song as they are at creating soundscapes of noise. Amazing. Track 5, Religious Attack, starts off with what I can only describe as a power electronics beat, which makes sense considering Ramleh's history. There are more gang vocals, but they seem to be warped by the electronic malfunctioning that surrounds them. This song is a very driving, angry song that's nonetheless played at a steady mid-level tempo. To be quite honest, I can't say I was a huge fan of this song, but I didn't hate it either, and it was still in keeping with the atmosphere of the album, so it was a stumble, but I didn't trip. Now, the next song is titled Racial Violence, and it continues with this heavy electronic no-wave vibe. It was at this point that I realized the theme of the album. You know, you'd think that I'd have realized it before with the title and everything, but I didn't. So I get now that there's this socio-political theme to the album, and while I'm not going to delve into it and dissect the lyrics or anything, I can easily say that this is quite in keeping with the angry yet controlled aspect of the music, as well as the militant noise-geared electronics. The bass in this song is absolutely exhilarating, especially in tandem with this gritty, squealing, high-pitched guitar that they've got going on. This one has no vocals, but I am a huge fan of Ramleh's instrumental tracks, even if they are in a more structured and regular form like this one. Unfortunately, at 11 minutes, this song does overstay its welcome because I don't find it quite as engaging as the first track. Your Village Has Been Erased is another power electronics light song. Once again, not a huge fan of this one. I'd really like to chalk that up to just personal taste, but it also seems like the slower paced songs are the ones on this album that I like less. So I don't know if I just need to give them more listens or if Ramleh is actually worse at this sort of thing. I'd like to think that that's not the case because their long droning tracks I really do adore, but maybe they just aren't as good at the angry post-punk quasi-ballad. Procreation as an imperialist act definitely is giving me krautrock vibes. It has this really creepy echo guitar that reminds me a lot of newer krautrock bands like Beak. This song is all about atmosphere. In fact, it might be one of the darkest songs on the album. It's not sad, it's a very muscular song, but it's very dark as well. There's a lead guitar in this song with an absolutely beautiful visceral tone to it that I just can't get over. There's also a lot of feedback, and this song is just a heavenly combination of rock and pure noise. I think this might be my favorite track on the album, but I'm really gonna have to listen a few more times to be sure, which I'll definitely be doing because I really, really enjoyed this album. Now, the last song, Natural Causes, is a thick, hazy, psychedelic noise rock track. This has a very anthemic feel, which I feel is very appropriate for a closer, and also circles around to the noisy, drugged-out feel of the beginning of the album, which really gives us a sense of completion. There are 2 electric guitars playing drawn-out psychedelic solos on top of a very gritty bass guitar. There are also some muted gang vocals in this song that end up giving us a really cool, once again anthemic melody that's very appropriate for a closing song. So, what is my rating? Now, I give this album an 8 out of 10. Overall, I think that this is a really good album. It's an angry, dark album born out of social and political unrest, and so, we're just gonna forget the fact that it dropped right before the beginning of Pride Month and hope that that was a coincidence. With a power electronics band, you never really know. But Ramleh really shows off their diverse influences on this album, ranging from avant-garde electronic forms of music to psychedelic rock to the American no-wave scene. And they do it all with such skill that nothing ever sounds out of place, and all of these diverse genres work together to create something new and powerful. There's a coherent atmosphere of both anger and strength that's built through a wall of noise and carried along with driving industrial beats. This also might be one of Ramleh's most accessible albums, which is pretty awesome since you'd usually expect that if a band like this went accessible, all of a sudden it would end up compromising their artistic integrity, which they do not do here. Now, some of the things that I don't like about this album are, the only con I really have is that it's very long. But I honestly felt engaged and focused the entire time. I never got bored. I think the pacing was great. I can definitely see how the long runtime might turn some people off, though. We said that I don't like some of the slower songs, but then again, I'm thinking I might need to go back and listen to them again. Like I said, I'm definitely going to be going back and listening to this album again. And so, maybe I'll get back to you with an update if I do change my mind. But these are really just my first impressions on the album. I guess the vocals. I'm not really a huge fan of gang vocals where it's just several people yelling together, but I think that it really matched the theme of this album as one of social unrest, so that's really just my personal taste butting in here. One of my favorite aspects of this album is the tonality of the electric guitar throughout that manages to be both noisy and psychedelic. So, do I recommend this album? Yes, yes, yes. I think that this is a great album. We're getting towards the middle of 2019 here, and I am just waiting to see what summer bangers come out. Now, I can tell you that this Ramleh album is certainly not going to be the summer album of the year. This is not one that you play while you're sitting out by the pool, with a drink in your hand, just listening to Power Industrial. But it is a very good album. And even if you're not familiar with Ramleh, or even free improvisation or noise in general, I think that you'll still really like this album, as long as you're into noise rock, post-punk, no-wave, the sort of darker side of post-punk and psychedelic rock. I definitely recommend this album to anyone who is a Ramleh fan. If you are a Ramleh fan, you are going to love this album. It's definitely one of their more rock-oriented albums. It's not a spacey ambient album, but there's just really no chance that if you're a Ramleh fan that you're not going to like this album. Then again, watch a bunch of fans come out of the woodwork and prove me wrong right after this. I'm probably going to start reading a lot of reviews where the fans are saying, I hate this album, it's awful, it's accessible, they went pop. I don't think that they compromised themselves in any way. There are quite a few songs with pop structures, with that regular song structure. And there's vocals, there's harmony sometimes. There's a lot of atonal stuff going on there too. But, it's still good. A lot of fans of bands like this, come on, this is a power electronics band, a death industrial band. They do noise music. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people coming out and saying, this album sucks. It's totally a sellout. I don't really see anyone who didn't already listen to this type of music start listening to it. It's not going to be on Disney Channel. It's a very dark album. and just, despite the fact that it is more accessible than some of their past stuff, it's still pretty experimental. There's still a lot of stuff in there. There's still the drone. There's still these spacey psychedelic noise tracks. You'll always have people disagreeing. But this is my basic opinion. I think that it is a really good album, and I would definitely recommend this to you, whether you're a fan of Ramleh or not, whether you're a fan of the genre or not. As long as you like rock music, definitely give it a try. Now, I decided that I would do a little thing at the end of this. Maybe I'll start doing it from now on. It's going to be called What Am I Listening to or Watching? And so today I want to get into what else I'm listening to and what else I'm watching, just to cue you in as to what some of my future reviews might be. So what I've been listening to a lot lately is actually a lot of electronic music. I kind of got into this 90s dance music. If you recall, my first review was of a trip-hop album. It was of Goldfrapp's Felt Mountain, which is a early 2000s electronic album. But I've been listening to a lot of... I got into house a little bit. I decided to listen to house because I'm a huge fan of 80s dance, and so I thought, why not get into 90s dance? House has always been a difficult genre for me to get into, so it did take me a little while, but I do have some things that I've latched onto that I like, and so I'm going to be delving further into that. But the main genre that I have been listening to lately is liquid funk. Now, liquid funk is a subgenre of breakbeat / drum and bass. Now, if you know anything about drum and bass or breakbeat, you know that there are just hundreds of tiny micro genres. They just have everything just tiny. The same way they do with techno and house. These electronic genres, they have every tiny movement each tiny small movement is reclassified as a whole new genre, tiny little subgenre. And so liquid funk is a subgenre of drum and bass. It's a subgenre that really grew out of tech step and hard step, but it's a little more lighthearted. So it's harkening back to, they've got funk in the name there. So you know that they use some funk samples or stylistic tendencies. Liquid funk is really cool. It usually has this really, the bass line is great. Just like in any funk song or any funk influence song, you have this nice warbling bass line. Liquid funk has been what I go to in the morning to get myself pumped up and in a good mood. And maybe, hopefully, I will be reviewing an album in that genre. Now, what have I been watching? Well, I actually just started watching a series on Netflix today. Earlier today, I thought, you know what? I want to watch some type of show. I'm tired of listening to documentary podcasts, which I have been listening to a lot of true crime podcasts. And I thought, you know what? How about instead I watch a crime TV show? Because that's a huge change. So I went ahead and did that, and I put on this little show. It's called Black Spot, and it's pretty good so far. I would rate the first episode maybe a 7 out of 10, and I think it definitely shows promise. It is in French, so if you can't watch movies or shows that aren't in English, then by all means skip it. I'm not sure if on Netflix you can change the language to English or not. It might just be... You might be able to switch it. I don't know. I didn't try. But yeah, it is a French show, and it's basically a crime show. The police are trying to figure out why there have been so many crimes going on in their area. And it seems pretty interesting. I was sort of confused at the beginning because by the description, I really expected something else. And so I won't read that description to you because I think that it's kind of misleading. But, it's actually a pretty good show. It has a very toned down, realistic, gritty, almost calm sense of cinematography, though. It's very dark, physically dark, visually, the lighting is dark. The contrast is turned all the way down. It doesn't look bad. Actually, it looks pretty nice. It certainly doesn't heighten tension. So I'm a little concerned about what that might be bringing to us. It actually reminds me a lot of some of these more realistic... there was a Swedish, or I believe it was Swedish. Maybe it was from Norway. Anyway, it was from one of those Northern European countries. There was a movement back in the 90s, and then it sort of resurged, of sort of a neo-noir genre, and a lot of it was very realistic true crime. It wasn't true crime, it was crime. It was very realistic, however, so it almost made you feel like this stuff was based on a true story, because it was very humanizing, and it focused a lot on social themes and ideas, and, social issues. And this kind of reminds me of that genre. I'll have to look up what that was called and get back to you with that. It was a really interesting, the original thing that led me to it was the film Insomnia, which I don't know if you guys have ever seen. Christopher Nolan directed a remake of this film, but I think the original was from 1997 and it is a Swedish film, I believe, maybe Norse, Icelandic. You know what it's from somewhere up there. Not to be rude, but I seriously just don't remember where it was from. Christopher Nolan did a remake of that film, also titled Insomnia, and they were both pretty good. But that's what first led me to this little genre, which, I'd love to look up for you now, but I really have to go and, lay down in bed, eat some of my Chick-fil-A that I have left over. I've got a little sugary drink over here, and yeah, basically just ignore you guys. So that's all I have for today. All right, love you guys.